If you live in North America, you are probably familiar with the ESRB. It's a self-regulated review board that determines the age appropriateness of most published games, similar to the MPAA and their movie ratings. Well, similar to the MPAA, the ESRB has four main rating categories. There's the E rating, which means the content within the game is suitable for gamers of all ages. There may be mild expressions of violence, very little use of offensive language, and generally no objectionable content, so the ESRB has determined that those games that have an E rating, whether you're 5 or you're 95, the content in the game is appropriate for you to play. Then we have E10, which is the ESRB's newest rating, first introduced in 2005. You might have some suggestive humor and very mild violence, but it's generally still acceptable for almost all ages. Just that in some cases, E10 games can be more mature than E-rated games, and maybe geared towards older kids rather than younger kids. A T rating contains a bit more violence, including a mild use of blood and a moderate amount of offensive language, and the occasional presence of sexual themes. Then finally we have M-rated games. Games with this rating may contain frequent uses of profanity, partial nudity, and graphic violence. But there's one rating that we haven't talked about, and it's one that you rarely hear about. Actually, I left out two. One of them is EC, or Early Childhood, which was recently retired by the ESRB, so it's no longer in use. But essentially, these were games specifically made for children under the age of 5, and were mostly educational. You know, think of those point-and-click computer games that a lot of us grew up with, where there really was no actual gameplay involved. It was mostly used to help young kids learn new concepts in order to grow and develop. Now that EC no longer exists, those types of games just get an E rating. But there is another rating that still exists within the ESRB's rating system, the A rating. Well, technically it's AO, because it stands for Adults Only, but it's better known as the A rating, so that's what we're going to call it. And we've all heard of it before, but know very little about it. Like, well, what does it take for a game to get an A rating? So we're going to talk about that in today's video, so pull down your pants, grab some lotion, and a sock, because today, we're gonna get a little naughty. A game receiving an A rating is classified by the ESRB as having strong sexual themes and extreme amounts of violence. The most obvious question though, what is the actual difference between an M rating and an A rating? Both of these ratings contain extreme forms of violence and sexual content, so yeah, what's the actual difference? Well, there are two important differences. The most obvious one is that an A-rated game is a lot more extreme and graphic in its themes of sex and violence. Well, exactly how much more extreme are A-rated games than M-rated games? When we're talking about violence, the difference is a lot harder to distinguish. Rockstar's Manhunt 2 received an A rating in 2007 due to extreme violence, but if you've ever played the A-rated version of Manhunt 2, there's really no drastic difference between its contents and that of, let's say, Mortal Kombat, where you're decapitating the heads of your opponent and ripping their limbs apart. It's really the same shit. And the ESRB recognized this and has since refrained from giving a game an A rating based only on its violent depiction. So, if a game gets an A rating, it's most likely due to its strong sexual themes and not the violence. And when it comes to sex, there's a much more clear distinction. So while M-rated games, like The Witcher for example, often depict nudity and contain a lot of sexual content, A-rated games are basically pornos. Not only do you have scenes that contain nudity, but sexual acts are also being simulated on screen. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is the best example of this distinction. The game was initially given an A rating by the ESRB due to a controversial hot coffee minigame that basically simulated sexual intercourse between the game's protagonist CJ and a female character. After Rockstar removed that minigame, however, the ESRB re-rated the game and gave it an M rating. Which brings me to the second difference between the M and A ratings. Why do publishers not want their game to receive an A rating and often go out of their way to make sure that it does not get an A rating and gets an M rating? Well, let's put it this way. We all remember that time in our lives when we were young. We'd go to a game store, we see a cool game, but it was rated M, and the cashier behind the counter refused to sell the game to you because you weren't old enough. You had to be 17. The thing is, with GameStop, Best Buy, whatever store we're talking about, they cannot get into legal trouble for selling the M-rated game to you if you're underage. It's all self-regulatory. There are no actual laws regarding children under 17 playing underage games. Those laws do not exist. But when it comes to pornographic material, yeah, it's illegal to sell or otherwise distribute such material to minors, so you legally have to be 18 to buy those games. Well, then why don't stores just follow the law, right? Sell the game, but make sure that you're at least 18. But stores like GameStop, they will flat out refuse to put those types of games on their store shelves. It's the same reason why Blockbuster never sold X-rated films. Imagine a kid going to GameStop, trying to buy a copy of Mario Odyssey, and right next to it on the shelf is an A-rated game that has a naked woman on the cover. A lot of parents would be outraged if GameStop did something like that, and would probably stop taking their kids to GameStop if they promoted or even sold pornographic games. And even if the stores could get away with something like that without parents complaining and there being a huge problem with that, it's not like Sony, Microsoft, and especially Nintendo would ever approve those types of games onto their platform. Consoles are known for having a fairly rigorous approval process and have always rejected pornographic games from coming to their platform. So in order for a game to be commercially viable, developers need to make sure that their games contain no A-rated content, because if the ESRB gives them an A rating, the developers and publishers will miss out on a very large chunk of the video game market, the console market. And even if they decide to go ahead and put the game on PC, many storefronts on PC will outright reject it, and even if a storefront like Steam approves it, you know those types of games will never be featured or promoted on the front page, and they're gonna get lost in the shuffle. So that's gotta be the main reason why we don't get a lot of A-rated games, because sex and porn, these things are very taboo in society. So demand is not gonna be all that high, and even if you found the demand, retailers and digital publishers will flat out refuse to sell it. So those types of games have no commercial viability. And when it comes to those big publishers that finance the development of a lot of games, they're not gonna put money into a project that won't give them a return on their investment. And a lot of these companies, think of your EAs, your Activisions, they're publicly traded companies, and if they decided to get into the porn market, you might have a lot of bad PR as well, even if you did have a market and you did find a way to sell the game. It just wouldn't be worth all the controversy for them. But despite this, we still have a good amount of pornographic games on PC because, as we all know, PC is an open platform, so in theory, anybody watching this video can decide to make a game and publish it. Most of these games aren't even rated by the ESRB, and a lot of them are self-published, so they can find a way to get the game onto PC. Even if the storefronts reject it, they can find a way to get that game out there. But the one thing all these games have in common, because the AAA publishers want nothing to do with porn, all these games are made by small independent studios made up of no more than 5 people that were one day really bored and super horny. So there you have it. The A rating is not often discussed in the gaming industry because of its taboo nature that results in there just being no money involved in developing such games, because consoles will just refuse to sell the game, and even if you found a way to get your game published, it's going to be hard to make any real money because how are you going to promote such a game? But the truth is, there are much easier and better ways to simulate sex than playing a virtual porn game, like buying a fleshlight or one of those egg things. For those of you that know what I'm talking about.